Hello creators and welcome to Helen Joy Creates. This video is in response to a challenge by CraftyMichelle. In fact, it's two challenges in one. So CraftyMichelle had put out an October challenge for Trash to Treasure, as well as an altered tin challenge. So I decided I would put the two together into one challenge and do that. So I got my tin, an old baked bean tin, and just measured it up so that I could cover it first and then find out the dimensions, cut my paper to size, and then decorate my paper before covering my tin. The paper I'm using is a Bristol smooth paper, 180 DSM weight, so a good sort of weighty paper, and a nice smooth surface for me to decorate. I was using my Stampin' Up stamps to decorate it, and also just did a little bit of coffee staining, as you'll see in a minute, on the paper, just to give it a nice background type colour. Rather than cutting the paper to the exact size, I just made a mark roughly where the paper met and just scored it along that line. I had found in the past, especially when you're maybe doing a wash on the paper, it does tend to shrink a little bit, so I didn't want to cut it down and then it be too small. So just having that line mark, so I knew roughly where it would come to, and then be able to cut it later if I wanted to. I decided I wanted the background not to be white, so thought I would get some coffee and stain the paper first before I decorated it. So this is just what I had in the cupboard. So mixed up some strong coffee, so as you can see, a very big teaspoonful of coffee granules with just a little bit of water in the bottom of the cup. So just give that a little bit of a mix, and then I had just bought some makeup sponges from Poundland, so just use one of those to wipe over the paper. Then just to add a bit of extra element to the wash, I sprinkled some salt, particularly around the middle of the paper where there wasn't going to be so much of the other stamping that I was planning to do. So as this dries, you'll see that the coffee kind of comes together around the granules of salt. I did add a little bit more coffee because I think it was a bit too dry at that point, just to make it obvious where it was. I just added a bit more salt, and then I just tipped it up a little bit just to spread the coffee and blend it in a little bit more. I'd also planned that I was going to wrap some string around my tin when I was done, so I had this white parcel string, so decided that I would also dip that in the coffee to give it a similar colour. So I just wrapped it round the tin a few times so that I could get have a rough estimate of how much string I wanted, and then dunked it in the coffee for a little bit before letting the paper and the string dry. I then wanted to make some elements for the tin can that would be a little more 3D and stand out. So the plan was to use the beautiful friendship stamp set. So the roses I was planning to use on the stained paper that we'd already used, but I wanted some leaves to give a little bit more dimension to it. I also used some leaves from the Framed for You set as well, and stamped those both on the other bit of paper that I'd cut from the bit that went around the can, and just stamped on here so that I could cut them out and stick them on later. I used the Granny Apple Green ink pad for this one and just did some second generation stamping, so both a initial stamp, first generation, and a second stamp, just to get two slightly different tones of colour. Looking back now and watching my video as I'm editing it, I'm wishing I had noticed those faces on the newspaper. I think seeing those eyes look a bit scary. Sorry about that, and I will try and notice things like that in the future. So as you can see, I'm just printing a few leaves, and then we'll cut them out by hand, as unfortunately I don't have the die set to cut them. As the leaves and stems are quite small and delicate, I just used some nail scissors actually to cut them out, just to help me with getting the precision that I would need. My coffee stained paper is now dry, so I'm just going to rub off the salt from it so that we have a smooth surface to work on. I guess theoretically, to add a little bit of texture, you could leave the salt on, but because I was going to be stamping on top, I didn't really want it to be a rough surface. And I just wanted to measure it up again against the tin, and like I said earlier, as you can see, there has been a little bit of shrinkage, maybe just a couple of millimeters. So it's just something to take into consideration if you do want to cut down your paper to exactly the size that it's going to go around, that if you do wet the whole paper, it probably will shrink a little bit. So just to take that into consideration if you're going to be cutting it. So we're going to go back to our stamping and the beautiful friendship set, and I was going to use some of the roses. So I've got my large E-block acrylic block there, and I'm going to use Flirty Flamingo. As you'll see when I'm stamping, I do leave a little bit of a gap between these roses as I stamp them, because the plan was to use the smaller rose in the set in between the larger roses. And then on this opposite side, I try and stamp them slightly alternate diagonally to each other, not exactly opposite, just to give it a little bit more interest so it doesn't look so uniform. So next I use Melon Mambo, which is slightly deeper shade than the Flirty Flamingo, for the smaller rose. So just adding that in the gaps first, as well as a little bit of second generation stamping there, and a little bit also in front of the larger one with that deeper colour, just so it gives it a more three-dimensional effect with the darker colour being in front. Then on to the other side and the same again. I think I'd got a little more confident on this side and did a bit more stamping with this deeper colour, and so ended up with it darker on this side than my first one. So I did then decide I would maybe need to add a little bit more of this melon mambo onto that first side that I did, just to balance it out a bit better. The beautiful friendship set also has a couple of smaller sort of bud type flowers, so I decided I would add those in to just give it a bit more spread into the centre of the paper. And again, using the melon mambo, but second generation stamping it, so it wasn't such a deep dark colour. The set also has some flower centres, so I just thought I would try and add those, although I think maybe it was a little too dark. I tried then doing it as a second generation, but maybe doing it in a different colour, particularly this one maybe was slightly too strong. I don't know what you think, but I wasn't totally happy with it, but seeing as I started, I thought I'd carry on rather than making it look like I had an odd one out. Then next comes the leaves. So for the leaves I used my pear pizzazz. I've only got this colour in a little ink spot, so thought I would use that. It's just a slightly more kind of olivey, deeper colour than the granny apple, which I thought would go better with the coffee stained type look. So just adding a few to the top and then also to the bottom as if they're poking out through the bottom of the paper, and then the same on the other side. And again, as you can see, doing a mixture of first and second generation stamping to get that deeper and lighter tone of the colour. I then decided it did maybe need lightening up a little bit with the granny apple green, so used the slightly smaller leaves, the ones that just without the stem, just two leaves, just to add a little bit of those in between. So as you can see, it's a much sort of more vibrant colour. I decided it needed a little bit more featheriness, so used the fern type leaves from the Framed for You set, and again used the granny apple green for that. As many of you probably know who've been watching me, I'm quite new to all of this, although I am enjoying it. So please share any ideas you've had of things that you've altered and upcycled, what you've enjoyed most, and are there any things in and around your home that you still use regularly that you've made? Back in Zambia, our house, I do actually have some baked bean tins that I upcycled into cutlery holders. I actually covered them in fabric and stuck them together, so they're in the middle of our table with our cutlery in. Right, I think I've done enough stamping on this piece of paper now, so we will try and see if it fits on the tin okay and try and stick it down. I thought glue dots were probably my best bet at trying to stick on the paper to the tin, so that's what I did. So just made 2 lines of dots, one for the start and one for the finish, and then obviously I'll need to put some more on for the overlap. So just lining up the inside part of the paper first, ready to wrap the rest around, and then adding some glue dots onto that last edge of the paper. That will be the last bit that gets the end that gets stuck on. So once the glue dots are on, just carry on wrapping that around, trying not to get it stuck to anything else and just trying to keep it straight. I used the top edge as my line to try and make sure it was straight as I put it on. So there we go, a covered tin. Now to add the extra elements. So I've got here all my leaves that I stamped and cut out earlier. Then I'm just using tweezers to bend the leaves in the centre just to give them a bit of a 3-dimensional effect so that they stand up a bit out of the tin when I stick them down. So now those are ready, time for sticking. Just use some tacky craft glue and just sort of dot them around in the different places, probably where there aren't any leaves already or in front of a few, just to give a little bit of that extra dimension to them. I didn't worry too much about being extra neat with the glue as it dries clear anyway, so having a little bit extra glue on it will probably just help with preserving it a little bit and making it stronger anyway. So next I've got the coffee stained string that we did earlier, so I wanted to wrap some around the top and the bottom, so just divided the string in half so that I would have equal amounts for the top and the bottom. And then again use the glue dots to help with keeping it in place. It possibly would have stayed in place just with wrapping it, but I just wanted to be extra safe and have the glue dots there to help it with not sliding around. As you can see, I left a little extra bit at the beginning just so it would leave enough for me to be able to tie the end to it, just to make a knot or a bow or something. So just kept wrapping it around until I got near the end, and then decided I would tie them together and just also used a little bit of glue to make sure that it stayed in place, as it was not where the sticky dot was. Then went round just pushing up the sticky dots where they were sticking out a little bit further than where the string was, partly to help keep the string in place, but also just to try and neaten it up a little bit. And then just adding a little bit more glue on the areas that seemed to not be quite staying in the right place. I had been thinking I would tie a bow, but it just didn't seem to work, so I thought I would just trim off those ends just for a little short tie. Then the same on the bottom. For the bottom, I decided I wouldn't do a tied bit, but just let it finish at the end, just to have it wrapped around. And just again finishing it off with glue to make sure it stays in place. So there we have it, one altered tin as well as a trash to treasure. So thank you so much for those challenges, CraftyMichelle. Please do check out her channel and maybe have a go yourself at this challenge. Do let me know in the comments below what you would use this tin for. It could be used for pens, or it could be used for, or maybe for some cutlery. If you have any other ideas, please do let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and please do remember to give me a thumbs up, and hopefully see you again soon. Take care.